Okay, we are back with part 3 of lesson 13, and we are in 26 right now. And what we just finished doing is adding some event handlers, or the on events, for the next and last buttons. So just to kind of review what my code is doing here. First, I've got a variable called current index, and I'm setting it to 0 when we start out. And that we may have to change that later, like we said. I've got a variable called favorite things, and it's an array. It's empty at this point. I append 3 things to the array called favorite things, and I put in there 3 strings: pizza, ice cream, and grapes. I've got a function that's reset the screen, which sets the text at the counter, this little thing up here, to the current index plus 1 of favorite things.length. So whatever the index is plus 1, because remember it's 0 indexed, so the first thing is actually 0. So if we have 0 plus 1, it makes this 1. Then I also change this printout area here to whatever the current index is in that array. Now I've got 2 event handlers. I've got 2 buttons, one for next button and one for last button, these 2 here. And the next button increases the current index button by 1 and then resets the screen. There's the function call right there. And then the last button decreases the current index by 1, and then there's your reset screen call button there, or call function there, which calls this function up here every time. So I can move forward and backward, and then it says you may note that it throws an error if you go out of bounds, which we already did that. So I've done that. So now we're going on to 27. So I'm going to click finish, continue. And we are on 27. So I'm going to go back to my blocks just so it's a little easier to see. And it says here, adding new items. So now what we want to do is, if someone wants to add an item to their list, then they're going to put it in here. They're going to click on add. So we want to be able to do that. So it wants to add an event handler for the add button. So I'm going to go ahead and grab another on event. It doesn't matter where you put this. I'm going to put it up here at the top just because, or like right up here to make it easier for you to see it. But I want to pick the add button, and I called it add button. Then write the code in your event handler that uses get text to access the user's new item. Inserts the new item to add that item to your array at the current index, calls your update function to update the screen, and then the new item should be displayed, and then run your program. So I want to get the user's text, and I want to make that whatever the insert item is. So if I go back to my variables, I'm going to look at insert item. So here it is right here, and put that in there. I want to make sure I put my list, which is called fave things. And then if we go back here to insert item, it tells us this, I believe this is our index, but if you wanted to double check, you could just go to here, and you can see you've got list is the first one, so that's my fave things. Index is going to be our current index because it said inserted at current index, and then the C is where we're going to put the get text. So I'm going to type in here current index. And then for the C part here, this is where I want to put in the get text. So we should, I think that's in the UI controls, and here it is, get text. Oops, that's going to cause a problem. Okay, hold on. Get text. I think my mouse battery's dying. And then drop that in there, and then we're getting the text from the ID, and that is called the text input. And then we also wanted to reset the screen, so we're going to call that function again. And that function, we use the call function block, and we say reset screen. So now what's happening when I click on this add button is it's inserting an item in my array called favorite things in the current index position, and it's putting in there whatever is in that text input field. So let's go ahead and run that and try that out. So first I want to click next. So now I'm at 2 of 3. You notice when it started out, when I hit reset, it automatically said 0 of 0. So then when I click next, it jumps to 2 of 3. we'll fix that later in like one of the next ones. It must be the next one because we don't have very many left. But so I click next, so it's still working if I do this. Now right now I'm at current index ice cream, which is the third thing, which is which is index 1. So now I'm going to type something in here and see if this works. So I want to type I type in bananas, and then I click on add. Okay, so perfect. So you see what happened is I got bananas put up here, which is now in that the current index spot. This number here that was 3 before increased to 4. So now let me go ahead and click next, and there's my ice cream. There's my grapes. Now in 4 of 4, before grapes was 3 of 3. So now let me go back. There's ice cream again. There's bananas, and there's pizza still in 1. Okay, so that's working. My add button is working perfectly, and my next and last buttons are working perfectly. So the only problem we have to fix now is when we start it, how it says that 0 of 0, then we have to fix this looping thing. We want it to be able to go from the last item directly to the first item, and then from the first item back to the last item when we hit last. So that's going to be in the next ones. So that works perfectly. I'm going to go ahead and hit finish and then continue. And we are in 28. And it's loading slowly, and there it is. Okay, so staying in bounds. So we're going to use an if statement for this, and that means staying inside our index, because before we got to the last thing of our index and we hit next and it's trying to add one to the index, but there's nothing else there, so we're out of bounds. So what we're going to use is an if statement to try to keep us in bounds and get it to loop back to the beginning. So what this says, let me go ahead and do my blocks, and what it says is we can increase and decrease, but if we go out of bounds, we get that error that I had the first time. So I didn't, but I'll do that. I'll run that again just so you can see it again, what's happening. But if I click on next, 3 of 3, and then I go here, next, I get this error that pops up. It says 4 of 3. It's all messed up. I have a warning. It says line 8. So everything is all messed up. So I want to reset that. And so now I want to do add if statements to the event handlers on the next and last buttons to prevent that from happening. And it says, it gives us 2 strategies to do this. So there are 2 different ways we can do it. But we want to have an if statement inside of each of these event handlers for the next button and the last button. So the 2 strategies it says to prevent this from happening, we're going to add an if statement to the event handlers on the next and last buttons. They should check the value of the global index variable before they change it. So if you notice here, what we're doing when we're clicking next and last, we're changing the current index variable. So we want to put in an if statement in there so to make sure that it doesn't change it out of bounds. So there's 2 ways it says we can do it. We can either block it, which means don't change the index if it will result in a value that is out of bounds, or we can wrap it. So which means that once we get to, say we're at 4 of 4, then we can either block by saying, okay, it can't go any further than that, or we can wrap it by spinning it back to 0, which I like spinning it back to 0, so we're going to try to wrap it and see what happens. That's the harder option, I think, a little bit, but it's not that much more difficult. Blocking would be easier, maybe, but we would only be able to just go forward and back. I want to be able to go all the way around and loop that around. So set the index to be the other end of the array. So in other words, going past the end of the array moves the index back to 0. So what we're going to do here is we're going to need some if statements before the current index is increased or decreased or incremented or decremented. I think that's how you say it. So I'm going to get some I'm going to need an if else for this probably. I'm going to do both of them at the same time. Let me get some more space here so you can see what I'm doing here. So I'm going to do both of them at the same time because they're both going to be pretty much the same except the opposite math. So I want to make sure that if I'm increasing it, I want to make sure that if the current index is less than the current index length minus 1, then I want it to increase. Otherwise, I want it to set it back to 0. So we'll see how to do that here in a second. Okay, so if I've got if I'm at the point where I want my current index is going to be equal to the length of the list. I'm going to try that first. So my current index variable, if it is equal to the favorite things dot length, and I don't know if I can type that in there. Let me try that. I might have to get then I want it to set the current index to 0. Oops, that didn't work. Hold on, that messed up. Okay, yeah, so it doesn't want to hold that current index plus plus. So what I'm going to have to do is drop that out of there. I'm going to have to hand type that in there. So current index favorithings.length. So it did fix that. Let me go back to show text, and what I'm looking for is this space right here. This is where I want it to go. Actually, in my else, if it's equal to the length, I want it to be current index is going to be equal to 0, and don't forget to put a semicolon at the end. And then in this case, I want it to do, or no, sorry, that would be the plus plus. Never mind. That's plus plus. And then this one here, current index is going to be equal to 0 if it gets to the end. So in this, let me go back to the block so it's a little easier to see. Okay, so in this case, what's happening in this particular if statement is it's saying if I click on the next button, so it says if current index is equal to the favorite things dot length, so the length of the favorite things, then set the current index to 0, so it loops back to 0. And then if current index or else otherwise, if that's not the case, then it's going to increase current index by 1. So let's see if that works. I think it's probably going to be an error because I think I need to add something else in here. But let me just test it to make sure and see if it runs. So I'm going to go ahead and click next. Oh, and it's not running right now because I think, let me reset because I didn't finish this. Let me finish this in here first. So this is going to be the opposite of that. Let's see here. Okay, so what I want to do is do the same thing here, but this one I'm going to have it be, if I click on the last button, if it ends up being less than 0. So I'm going to use my less than, and if current index, oops, it's not typing, there it is, index is less than 0, then I want it to change it to, let's see, we'll use assign a variable, and it's didn't grab, my mouse is dying on me. We want to make current index equal, oops, that's a plus sign. We want to make current index equal to the length of favorite things minus 1. So whatever that last index thing is. So I'm going to use my minus operator here, and I'm going to say my favorite things list length minus 1. So that's going to be fav things. So the length of favorite things minus 1. And then else, then I'm going to do this. Actually, I may have to take these out. These might not work in this. It's causing problems here. It's not going to let me stick that in there again because I have to edit it manually. So in this else block, what I had in there before was current index minus minus. Minus minus, and then this, don't forget to put the semicolon. So now let's go back to show blocks. And then let's see how that works. I'm not sure that this is going to work 100%, so let's try this and then run. I forget how I did this the last time. Okay, so next. Okay, so that is not working the right way. So I think, let me try this. I want to move this out. Oh, I can't move that out that way. I'm going to have to do it this way. I want to take this current index and do that first. So I'm going to come up here, and before I go into my if statement, I'm going to increase current index by 1, and I'm going to get rid of my else statement. And we'll see if that works. So I'm taking current index. I'm going to put it before my if statement. And then get rid of my else statement because I don't need it. And then I'll let show blocks so you can see it a little better. So current index, so what's going to happen is I click on next, it's going to increase the current index by 1. If the current index becomes equal to favorite things.length, it's going to set the current index to 0, and then it goes into reset the screen. The last button is going to be the opposite of that. It's going to subtract 1 from the current index. If the current index becomes less than 0, then it's going to set it to the last index, which would be favorite things dot length equals or minus 1. So now let's reset and let's run that, and then next. So it's still not working. I'm going to refresh. I'm going to reload this because it may be problems with my browser because I had some glitching here. Things keep popping up. Okay, and now let me run it, and then next. Okay, so now you can see, now it appears that it's kind of working. Okay, so now this part's working, so it's just my browser that was causing the problem. Now let's see what happens when I go past 3 of 3. So it took me back to 1, so that's working. So now let's go the last button, and that's working. Okay, so that works. Now let's make sure my add button still works. If I want to add bananas and click on add, it adds bananas 4, and then that next button works, last button works. Okay, so let's take a look. So everything works. So 28 looks good. Now the next thing, where am I at on time here? 18 minutes, not bad. So what's happening here is, just to review all of these, let me give you some more space to see this, is I've got a variable called current index set to 0. I don't like how that starts out at 0. I may want to change that to 1 because every time I reset and I run this and I click, it always starts out at 0 of 0. What happens if I change this to 1? I want to do that. Just change that to 1. And then it's still, let me see, reset, run. Okay, it's still doing it, and I because what's happening is nothing happens until I click the button, so that's part of it. So that's something that maybe we could fix later on. But anyway, so I've had this variable called current index. It's set to 0, and I just changed it to 1. It doesn't really matter where it's set, I guess. But I have an array called favorite things. I have 3 favorite things that have been added in here already. I have a function called reset screen that sets this counter to the current index plus 1, so it puts it in the right spot, of however many things are in the favorite things length list. So then it prints my favorite thing at the current index in this screen right here. Now I've got two things happening here. I've got an add button and next button on event handlers. So the first event handler says that for the add button, and I lost something here. No, I didn't. Sorry, that's the add button. I was thinking of next and last. It inserts an item into favorite things at the current index, and it puts in there whatever I type into this text input. So it gets the text from there, and then it resets the screen. So that's what the add button does. The next two are the next and the last buttons, and what they do when I click on them is it's going to increase the current index by 1. But if the current index reaches favorite things.length, whatever that is, then it sets it to 0. So it loops it back around to the beginning, and then it resets the screen. And then if I click the last button, it subtracts 1 from current index, and if the current index is less than 0, then it sets current index equal to favorite things.length minus 1, so the very end of the list, and then it resets the screen. So that seems to work. And let me run it again, and I click next, and the one thing that bugs me is it jumps straight to 2 of 3, but that's, I think, something we fix in 29. And then if I wanted to add something in there, I could, like I want to add bananas. And you notice that every time I reset this, the only thing it keeps are those 3 things, because those 3 things were set in the beginning of the program. And anything I type in here, I have to keep adding that. So that works. And then I don't get the error. So that is what this is supposed to look like when I get to 28. So now we go to 29. And this is going to be our last one. And this one, I believe, is just going to tell you some things that you can do to make it a little better if you wanted to. And this part here is just kind of a challenge, I guess. So what this wants you to do is instead of putting in, so there's just some recommended changes that you could do. Instead of putting items in at the current index, maybe you want to put them at the end instead. So instead of using insert item, maybe you could append items, and then rather than add them at the current location. It says give the user ability to remove an item at the current index. So we know how to remove an item from an array. So you could do the same thing here. If you added another button that said remove, then you could remove something from the list. Only add words if they are not blank. So what happens on this currently, if I run this and this is blank and I hit add, you see this number keeps going up here, add, and then I go next. So what's happening there is it's just inserting blanks. It's not putting in, it's just taking a blank, whatever's in there is blank. So how can we keep it from doing that? Then improving the appearance of the app. So if you wanted to make it nicer or whatever. So I'm not going to go into any of those things. If you want, you can mess with those. And then also the thing that I was saying before about getting this to reset the screen, actually getting this to say 1 of whatever right away. One of the things I think we could do that, speaking of that, is I could put in the function reset screen right here. I think I'm going to try that. That might get it to work. So then as soon as I hit reset, it's going to reset the screen and everything's going to be where it's supposed to be. So let me try that. So if I hit reset, run. Okay, so that worked. So right away, the first thing it did is it updated everything and it put me in 1 of 3. It said pizza, so now I click next, I'm at 2 of 3. So that was what I was talking about earlier. I had said changing this to 1, but that actually wouldn't do anything. So all I had to do was put in a function called reset screen at the beginning, and then I've already defined that function here. Because we have it here, it's not going to run unless we call that function. Or like in this case, we've called it when we push buttons, but we didn't call it at the beginning. It should still work if I add something else, because it's never going to go back to that point again. So if I add and I click things, some of the other things that you could do if you wanted to, it says if you want to remove the item from a list, you could go back into design here. You could change your size of your text area. If I can grab that right on the corner, there we go. And I can add another button in here, and then maybe make this button say remove. Oops, if I spelled remove right. And it did something like that. Maybe make it a different color. Oops, that's the text color. I don't want to do that. Let's turn it back to where it was. Kinda white. I think white is FFFF. And then background color, if I wanted to make that red, and say, okay, here's my remove button, and then change the size so it's closer to this one. Yeah, whatever. And then I could program that button to remove something from the list. So that is all optional. You can go ahead and do something like that with you if you want. I think right now, even though I didn't do anything really to it, it'll let me finish. I go to continue. Then you have two things here that are just stuff like that, but you have to type stuff in there. But you don't have to worry about that if you're in my class right now. The only thing I want you to do is at least get up through 28, and then play around with it a little bit on 29 if you want. But I'm not going to. I'm probably just going to look at 28 and then see if you did anything unique in 29. So that's all I have for you today. If you have any questions, you can go back through that and check it out. And then I will try to post some more of these if you think these were helpful. If you did think this was a helpful video, you can go ahead and click like in YouTube, and just or leave a comment and say that it helped you out or whatever. So that's all I've got for you today. I will see you later on.